But I think what I want to do for all of you is show how to set up replication and how to deal with some issues with it, show you maybe we can figure out how to break it, and just kind of play around. And I don't know if that's okay with the consensus here, but I think if I were to go to a presentation, I'd want to come out of there having seen how to do something as opposed to some boring slides. And the slides, I just got a new version of iWork and I couldn't update them last night, so they're a little out of date, but I'll use them as a guideline to follow. And I think what I want to do is follow them and then go to the computer and show you what the slide is kind of referring to and do it from there, if that's okay with you guys. Sound like a plan? I'll show you guys how to set up replication, how to do a multi-master replication, maybe touch on, if we have access, I could show you, we could maybe set up some monitoring. I use inotab and repmon. There are some other ones out there that I have yet to play with, as I'm still learning myself from having been a core developer to being a guy who actually has to use MySQL. So on this Mac I have two instances. One is running on 3306 and one is running on 3307, and I'll elaborate more on that later. Schema, that's a container of your objects, all your different tables for whatever you have. For instance, for Grazer we have two schemas we use, one where we kind of put all of our feeds and another where we put all of our user account information. Master, that's the instance where the data is first written to. And the slave, of course, that's a copy of the master that receives updates from the master. What is replication? It's copying data from one instance of MySQL to another where all the results are guaranteed the same on both ends. This is done by, you have a binary log on the master. Everything that happens to that master, any change, goes into that binary log. And the slave reads that binary log with an I/O thread that then copies it to a relay log. MySQL replication is atomic, it's non-blocking, and it's log-based, of course, as I've just mentioned, and it's also asynchronous. The architecture of the master has connecting slaves and it has a binary log. The slaves have two threads running. One is the I/O thread that reads the binary log, and the other one is the SQL thread. And the reason for this architecture is that you want to be able to have a process that's getting information from the slave, and then another one reading from the relay logs. Whereas if you just had one process, the updates that are coming from the relay log would hang up the speed of replication. So those two threads keep it so that it's fast. You have control files. On the master you have your binary log file, of course, and then you have an index file. That's a listing of all your binary log files that you keep around, and that can be controlled by how many days you want to keep them around. The slave has a master info, and that contains all of the information, the parameters for connecting to the master, the name of the bin log that it's currently reading from, that it last read from, and the position of that binary log file, and also how many retries it'll do if it can't connect, or the delay between retries, I mean to say. Then you have your relay log files. They can be named anything here. They're showing a hostname relay bin, but it could be whatever you specify in your my.cnf. You have your hostname relay bin index. That's just like the master bin log index that gives you a listing of all your relay log files. The difference with the slave with relay logs is that it purges them automatically. With the master, you have to be proactive to remove it. There's a setting in my.cnf to tell how many days to keep it around, or you can do purge master logs. Here's a sampling of the master info, and this was one I had edited. It's changed a little bit, but it's pretty much the same as this. You have the host name of the master, the bin log file that it's reading from, the last position, the host name, the username, the password, the port, and the time between retries.
Patrick, that's just also to be clear, that's actually stored in plain text on your file system, but it's
Yes.
owned by the MySQL user, so you pretty much have to be super user to see it. But you also had a question?
Yeah, you said that the slave purges the bin logs automatically. Is there a period of time they hold them after they're going to apply, or it's just almost instant?
I think it's after they've applied them that it gets rid of them.
So it just reads it down, applies it,
Yeah.
deletes it? Okay.
But you mean the entire log file, not one entry at a time?
Yeah, the log file, when it's done with it.
Right.
If it's in the middle of it, it obviously can't delete it, but I believe when it's done with it, it says that I've applied all of the updates from that relay log, yeah, it gets rid of it.
And you can set that, right? You can set the size, the
Yes.
maximum size. So if you have like very little space and you want to have, because if you have, I think default's like 1.1 gigs.
Yeah, I think
So-
I actually have it set in my my.cnf.
Yeah.
You see?
So if you have very little space and you want it to kind of delete the logs quicker than, waiting for 1.1 gigs to go through, then you can do that.
I'm going to start up parallels too. Okay, I can see. Might be on my parallels instance. We can kind of look at this. That's what I would prefer to do, the boring slides. And I might not have a lot of that. Here I have my relay logs. I name them relay log info, relay log index. You can name it whatever you like. I don't think I have any size limits on mine. Yeah, I have them set actually on this parallels instance. Let me resume this one. It's probably going to be unhappy because it was running. Yeah, it has to start up. So we'll let it do that in the background. We can look at mine. I don't have any crucial password information in my master info file. We can look at that too. User local. I prefer, for myself, I really like source compiles of MySQL. Recently we were dealing with a bug with 5.0.22. My CTO, he likes to try to keep as much as possible to the distributions installs. And I can understand the reason for that. But I found that there was a bug in 5.0.22 and some other versions of MySQL, and there weren't any other new Ubuntu packages for Dapper. So you've gone back to using source compiles. This doesn't look good. Like I said, on this Mac, I'm running 2 instances. So I keep 2 data dirs that have all of the master info and everything for each instance, and that's how I divide it up. But if we look at a master info file here, this is something I was trying when I was preparing this talk. I was trying to figure out what this number is, and I'm not quite sure. Maybe one of you know. But like the slide shows, we've got the name of the bin log that it's currently read out of, the last position. Since it's on the same server, it's localhost. And I just have username remote, password remote. And my master for this master is on 3307, and it's the other way around. If I go to data 2, master info, see here it's 3306. So that is what a master info file looks like. And we can look at the permissions. The var directory is always MySQL user MySQL group. Go back one. And since it is the same user and group, you set it so that only that user and nobody else can see it. Of course, like what she said, since it's plain text. Okay, master setup. Set up a user account for replication. You grant permissions. You set the server ID in my.cnf. You think about what sort of queries you have, if you have any custom functions, triggers. Triggers are interesting with statement-based replication, as I've found out in the last several weeks. Table types. For instance, if you have a master that has tables defined as InnoDB and you have a slave that doesn't have InnoDB compiled in, something like that, or CSV or whatever, that could be an issue, depending on what you're trying to do. Say, for instance, if you had a table you were writing to that was archive or something like that on the master, and you were trying to save the information, and you thought, oh, I'm going to run some fast queries on it on the slave. So if it's CSV on the slave, those queries are going to be extremely slow because you don't have, or archive I should say, it doesn't have indexes.
So the type of table should be the same.
It depends. For instance, if you had a setup where you had Apache logging to a master going into a archive table so that you're saving up Apache log data, and that might be going into a MyISAM table so the write is fast. But then you replicate that out to a slave whose sole purpose is to crunch the logs. You could do it several ways. You could have it so that on the master it's being written as one table type, and depending on the types of queries you're doing on the slave, you have it as another table type. If they're queries you run every once in a while, you have it archived on, say, on the slave, and you might possibly have it as MyISAM on the master. It all just depends what your application is. Let's see here.
Can I replicate views instead of whole table?
Can you replicate views instead of the whole table?
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. And you can also replicate triggers. And a lot of it, too, depends, too, if you're using row-based replication. And that's something I'm not as familiar with. I haven't used row-based replication. But row-based replication is different because it's not sending queries across. It's sending the actual binary data that's being changed. So depending on what sort of replication you're using, if you're using statement-based, then you have to make it so that whatever you want to happen on the master, that same thing it's okay for it to happen on the slave. I'll give you a for instance. We have a UDF that we only want to run on a slave at Grazer. This UDF's sole purpose is to trigger. It's a UDF that writes to a socket, gives an ID of a feed, and then it passes. We have a socket server reading from the socket, and it takes that ID and then grabs this reading list out of the table and calls a Perl script that then parses it and does its own thing. We only want that running on the slave. We don't want it running everywhere else. If we were to add that trigger on the master, it would replicate out to all the slaves, and that same thing would be trying to run on all of the slaves. And with triggers, what you have is if you have a trigger, say you have a trigger on table A that updates table B. If you have that trigger on the master and it replicates out to the slave, the action of the trigger is not replicated. The query that calls the trigger is what's replicated. So what you have ending up is that same query running on all the slaves to do whatever. And depending on what that query is, if you really don't want to run it on all your slaves, you might want to think about just running it on one slave and or running row-based replication where you just would have the trigger on the master, and then whatever data changes happen on the master are replicated to the slave. If that makes, if you know what I mean.
Question.
Yes.
If I have one database heavily indexed, another one does not have the indexing at all, is that okay for replication?
Yes, it is. As well, it just depends on your application on the slave. Also, what's being replicated. For instance, if you have an update being replicated that uses that index, that's an expensive update. It could be run really slow on your slave if you don't have the index on that slave.
Right. So the user see, if the user can see the performance difference, or who will see the lagging on the replication?
You can see how much the slave is lagging by the seconds behind when you do a show slave status, and I'll show you that. That's what we've been seeing all week. We have had these expensive queries that are just killing us, and we have some servers that are 3,000 seconds behind, and we were scratching our head. And it was because we had triggers that were being called that called other triggers that ran these queries multiple times, and we thought, we don't need to run these all on the slaves, we just need to run it here in this one place and have the data change here. And so we're thinking about going to row-based replication. That's what we were meeting about today, and why I was not preparing for this.
But the danger in your index is being different also if you rely on a unique index on the constraints. If you have, say, an insert on duplicate key query, then it may not trigger the undo the key clause. It may actually insert a new row if you don't have that unique key on the slave, for example, or if you do have on the slave, nothing else.
So replication must have a unique key, right? You have to have a unique key or something to identify that it's not just a duplicate, that you're updating information in a particular record, right?
Unless you want duplicates.
Well, the way it works is statement-based replication, which is what people are kind of used to, and that's what you will
That's
find in
what Oracle
4.0,
knows.
4.1.
Oh, what MySQL people are used to. I guess Oracle uses more of a row-based, yeah.
Right. And there's drawbacks and benefits. I mean, row-based replication, you might think, okay, well, let's say I have a table and I'm updating a 1 million row table to set everyone's value of some flag equal to 1. Row-based replication, you're going to get a lot of changes. Whereas statement, it's just this one statement, this update table set blah equal to 1 semicolon, and then that does a lot of changes. So
Draw a
there's
picture here.
there's benefits
This
and
is a picture I
drawbacks,
drew
but
today.
with statement-based replication, it just replicates just the statement. So you don't even know, it could affect 7 rows on the master and no rows on the slave if your data is different on the master and the slave.
This storage engine, table handler, optimizer, parser, these are kind of basic levels in MySQL. I might not have it perfect, but anyway, then you have your master right here. This is your slave. Okay, so we show it like this, but the slave is actually doing all the work of reading from the binary log. Anyhow, in MySQL, if you issue a query, you go into the client, you issue a query, select star from or update or insert, it goes through the parser breaks it down into pieces so that the optimizer can figure out what it's going to do, the execution path, and then the table handler figures out how it's going to get the data or set the data into the storage engine. With statement-based, it goes through the parser. With row-based, it goes right through here, table handler. There's the two functions for it. There are 3 main methods inside of the table handler. There's write row, that's insert, update row. Sorry for my writing. And we'll just have those there, and delete row. Those are for, write. There's also read row, that's for select, but we're not worried about that here. And they basically have arguments that's kind of the raw row format. With statement-based, it's going through the parser and all the work's being done here, and you're having to do all of this work up here to kind of figure out how you're going to execute it. With row-based, that's already done on the master, and so the binary data is going right here. So you have to just figure out what is your application and what you're replicating. If you're replicating updates, like Sheet mentioned, which are going to update tons of rows, it's going to make your binary logs huge on the slave and on the master, because that's what's being sent across. But if you're inserting one thing, updating one thing, then it might be quite optimal because you're not doing all this work anymore. It's all being done here and replicating across. So that's what you got to think about when you're deciding which way to go as far as statement-based or row-based. And not having used row-based yet, I don't know. I'm thinking it might benefit Grazer. So
Is row-based available on 5.0?
yes, it is, but you have to compile it into 5.0. I forget what option it is. It's binary bin log. I forget. We have net access.
I'll find it.
Oh, it's in this lovely book I got here. I brought all these books here. These are books that I really like. This one is really nice. This is the one Administrator's Guide. Is this one, and then the book by Jeremy Zawadny are my 2 favorites here. High Performance MySQL. This one talks about it in chapter 5. It even discusses using row-based replication.
This master-slave is not a failover situation. It's really just moving the data so that it's accessed.
Yes, it's up to you to figure out how you're going to deal with failover. And there are a lot of different ways. People have devised all kinds of schemes. Perl scripts monitoring things, using federated tables to see if they can connect to the server. Heartbeats. There's numerous ways you can do it, but there's nothing built into the server yet. -- with row-based replication option. If you compile MySQL by source, 5.0 and 5.1, anything later than that.
Two questions.
Yeah.
First of all, is it always unidirectional? Do you support bidirectional replication? And secondly, do you have any data transformation, or is it an exact? Does the row need to look exactly the same on both systems? In other words, could you take,
Yes.
for example, something that was stored in 3 columns, first name, last name, middle initial on one system, and then have that go over to the other system and be stored as a full name column for those 3 columns merged into one column?
No.
Any kind of data transformation?
No, the SQL would break. If the SQL statement that updates or writes to that master can't run on the slave, it's going to break. So that's what you got to ask yourself.
The DDL has to be the same for each table.
Yeah.
The structure has to be the same.
The structure, I was basically asking if there was any, if you can use a written function with that, what would do with transformation?
You could have potentially, you could have the table on the slave be a black hole table, and maybe a trigger of that table to update some other table.
Yeah, but if it's I don't know about row-based, but if it's statement-based, if it's referencing a column that doesn't exist, even if it's black hole, it's going to give you an error. And then your replication will stop.
What about the unidirectional versus bidirectional?
It's on the slides, but I'm going to draw it. I'm going to draw different setups. So, first most simple setup, master and a slave. Is this thing moving?
No.
Okay. The master has the binary log. The slave goes to the master. And the data is going this way. It's the slave is reading from the master, reading the binary log. It goes to the relay logs, and then they're applied to the actual database. And that's one setup. But if you wanted to, you could also make this guy a master. So that's back and forth. But there's a trick to doing that. If you have auto increment keys, you have to make sure this guy starts at 1 and this guy starts at some other number other than 1, say 2. I usually do offset it by 10 because if you want to add more masters, it makes it a lot easier. You don't end up with conflicts. And then you do, that's the offset. And then you also tell it to increment by 10 so that you don't end up with conflicts. So what happens, his next insert on the auto increment is that, and he's 20. So that's how I do it. So I'll tell you what we have at Grazer. We have, this is New York, this is Michigan, and we have,
Just push that up and right before you go back. Yeah. That's what it's intended to be.
up there? Okay.
Actually,
All the way down.
yes.
So we have a slave here. This is, we kind of use this as a backup slave, but we're going to be changing from that. And then we have some other web heads. They're a little bit smaller boxes. And we're going to move the databases off of there because these boxes are just being taxed too much. But anyhow, the idea is that this guy reads off of this master, these guys read off of here. You could actually do this too. You could go, and these guys could read off of here. So there are different types of setups you can do.
So slaves can read from slaves?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, all you got to do is turn on the bin log and then tell these guys that he's their master. All a master is a box that has a bin log on it.
Right. The other thing is for a slave to replicate its slave to like actually kind of to overload or to relay kind of the changes. There is a special one that you have to say like log slave updates, I think it is.
Yes,
Otherwise
absolutely.
it won't do that.
Yeah,
which
that's a
I
good
did
point.
this week actually by accident, where I turned it on. I'm like, okay, go replicate, and it's like I'm done, and I'm like, no, you're not. You've like 3 days worth of logs, and
Why is it not there?
it had 3 days worth of logs. They were just very small because it didn't actually log the slave updates. It just logged.
That's not very well documented, is it? I didn't find it to be.
I figured it out pretty quickly, so it's documented
I think
well
I did,
enough in
but I
Google,
felt,
I guess.
I never saw it in the document. I had to search for multi-master replication. So
Oh
this is
yeah,
what-
well, MySQL doesn't support multi-master replication, which is why it's...
I don't mean to say multi-master, dual
Oh,
master.
the relay,
Yeah.
like, well, the relaying thing?
Yeah. I mean, this guy updates him, and he updates him, and then they...
Yeah, that's not supported. The dual master is not supported.
Oh, you mean supported as far as we don't want to talk about it?
Well, as far as MySQL's official position is,
Ah, it's
we
up
don't
to you.
support it.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. So, that's Grazer's setup. You can also do this, and I don't like this at all. But there might be a need for it at certain times, and if you set up some sort of failover, you can do it. Do all kinds of things. It's just up to you to, it's open source. So you have this master replicating to him, so forth. But it's kind of like Christmas tree lights. If one of these guys goes out, then it's up to you to figure out how to make everything switch back on so that it doesn't totally break.
Right. So the dual master replication setup is not a bad idea because if one master goes out, the other one is fine. But circular is kind of bad.
It's Christmas tree lights. What I do at Grazer to deal with handles if things go down is I use DVIX password. I don't know, are you any of you guys Perl people here? Whoa, I'm outnumbered. DVIX password is a Perl module Brian Aker wrote that basically stores connection information in a Perl module file. And you just use a virtual user, you say DV1 virtual user, and it takes care of the password and all of that. And if something goes down, and I can set it up to automatically do this, I have several versions of that file with the handles set for different servers to connect to. So I just flip them and restart Apache. There's many more elegant ways of doing this. There's an article by Giuseppe Maxia that shows how to do something like this with Federated. I haven't read the article in a long time, but it looked really good, and I need to reread it. I could compile a list of good things to leave after I do this talk within the next week and email it to the meetup list so that you guys can read from it. They're little tidbits of information that I find really useful when I'm scrambling. So, in answer to your question, your original question was, is it unidirectional? It's directional in such a way that
It's set up bidirectionally.
the slave is reading from the master, but also that master can read from that slave if he has his
You can
binary.
keep the two of them in sync even when people are doing updates over here and updates over here. They
Yep.
swap for announcing.
Yeah.
It depends though, because you could have race conditions or just timing issues as far as the updates if you're depending on the updates coming in from two different directions at once.
Yeah, scenario, you're talking about race conditions. The way Grazer works is Grazer is a Web 2.0 Ajax type widget. I'll show you what it does.
So statement-based replication is like transaction-based? You're sending the statements over to be performed on the other machine?
Yes, yeah, it's all statements. Transactions,
Maybe you're adding the transaction.
there's really no transaction per se. I haven't tried out transactions over replication to see if the start commit and start. That's a good question.
We do actually. We had an issue where one of the statements in a transaction was failing on us and the entire transaction was rolled back. So.
Oh, okay. So is the start work and commit, is that replicated also?
Yeah.
Okay.
The documentation says updates to non-transactional tables are stored in the binary log immediately after execution. With an uncommitted transaction, all updates that change transactional tables, such as DB tables, are cached until a commit statement is received by the server. So that kind of implies that it's not actually writing to the binary log unless it actually updates the data.
I think otherwise it wouldn't make sense actually, because you could end up with two transactions going on concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
You'd end up with both of their statements being written, and would end up not actually being atomic transactions. It
Right.
actually just
Right.
flip the statements. Right.
And then rolling back wouldn't work at all.
Right.
Anyway, Grazer is a widget that's it's a Web 2.0. It's a client, and what we have is we have this application that serves out JSON. So you have a feed that you specify inside of the widget. Say whatever CNN or whatever, and it goes to our server. It says, "Do you have this in your cache?" If it does, it serves it out of cache. It serves the JSON, and the widget displays it. If it's not in the cache, it goes out, fetches the raw XML, does a bunch of transforms. We're really good at UTF, but it's taken a lot of blood and suffering. We parse it into our own internal format, and then we convert it to JSON. We also have our own XML parser that one of our guys wrote because we just were having headaches with XPath. So we store that in MySQL. And what happens sometimes is the other data center might have cached that. So this guy will come around and say, "I don't have it." And it tries to insert it, and then you'll see an error inside the log that it tries to duplicate entry. And that's been kind of a headache. So that's something you've got to consider when you're setting up replication. Am I going to have some latency that's going to, erase condition? And there are ways to get around it. One thing we did to try to make that a little bit smoother was to do a little bit of polling. We put in a silly loop inside the code. We tried 5 times to see if it's there, and if it's not, then we finally go out and get it. And that race condition also really bit us with logins. The user would log in and he'd hit one data center, and he'd go to the other data center and they'd say, "Oh, you're not there." And that caused some problems. So we added another hack in there to make it, try to deal with that. There are other ways to do it. You could.
How did you deal with it?
Pardon?
How did you deal with it?
We did that loop. We did that loop that says, "Are you there? Is it there? Is it there? Is it there?" Oh, now it's finally there. But the other way you could do it is say, "I can't find it on this. I'm going to go to the other data center, pick a server over there, maybe even go to the master and see if it's there." Even if you could do a select star where, the user ID. We have a sessions table, and the sessions table stores the user's cached information in there. We're going to change that, but you could do a select count and see if it's on there, and if it's on there, then you know that the user is okay. So there are other ways to get around it, but it's something to think about when you're designing it. Where is your data center? Are you pinging 20 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds? Is it going through numerous hops to get there? So that's something to consider. Let's see. Where were we with this? I know kind of what I should be talking about. Permissions for slaves. With replication, you have to make sure that you grant replication slave to whatever user you're going to set inside your my.cnf file. That's the syntax for that. I'll actually go through it. We'll see how we set up a slave. These are some of the settings you set in the master my.cnf. And I think what I'm going to do now is actually set this up. See if anything's running on here. Okay. MySQL-u root. Okay, show slave status. Okay, this is my, oh gosh. Okay, so this guy is running localhost. This the master host is localhost. User is remote. Port is 3307. And all the other information, bin log, position. These are the databases. And this is really bizarre. This is the bug that I was dealing with in 5.0.22. You would see the bin log do DBs repeated twice. See how these are all doubled? You don't see that in the newest version. And I was sometimes on my updates, I was getting failures because a statement from another schema would make it through somehow. I don't know how, but it would. As soon as I upgraded, the problem went away. Anyhow, this is my master. This is one of the masters. If I go to cache socket temp -2.sock, you'll see this guy's pointing to 3306. So I'm going to drop the database that we're going to use for the test, and then we'll recreate it in a second. Drop database, RPL test. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, I need to actually give the permission. So the server that I'm going to use as a master is the one running, the master running on 3306 for that Ubuntu box. So I need to grant replication slave. RPL test. On star two test at. I'm going to use this IP address, this new IP address here. I was looking at. This is the one I gotta use. Because this is the one that's going to come across as we talked about. Make double sure here that is the password. Yeah. Okay, so we've done that. So now we'll go through the Ubuntu box and re-enable all of the settings. So my.etc, my.cnf. Okay. So the server ID of the other two guys is 1 and 2. So this guy's server ID needs to be 3. The bin log we'll calling MySQL-bin log. Expire logs days, that expires the bin log, I don't need log bin actually because I'm not running a master. If I were running a master, that I would be doing log bin, that's how I would make a master. And the expire logs days would say keep 3 days worth of bin logs around. And that's the max bin log size. And there's a similar setting for the relay logs. So the databases I'm replicating are Grazer server, Grazer accounts, and this new database, which is not yet in existence. This is the relay log. We're going to have the info file, the index file. And again, we talked about the auto increment. If I were doing a master, I would have these set. We do it 10 at a time. We offset it by 3 because the other two are 1 and 2. But we're not doing that, so we don't need to worry about that. Master port 3306. Master host. That IP address is.
Excuse me, do you replicate them, you're saying whole databases rather than specific table mentioned?
Oh, you can do specific tables also. There's replicate, do, replicate wildcard, do. There, I can, if I get a connection, I can show you which different types of way there are. There's also ignore, and you may want to have tables that you don't want to replicate.
The way you set that up, you're replicating the whole database.
Yeah, we're going to be changing that soon too because we have tables where we cache all this information. We don't want to cache to replicate them to the slaves necessarily because it's a lot of data and we only need it in one place. You can also specify on the master which ones to put in the bin log as well. 10.188.75. Okay. Master host, master port, master user, sure everything matches. You want to make sure. RPL test. This is the one thing I need to change. Yeah, this is the option if you were running a master and you want to ignore a database. There's a do DB as well. That's if you want to, if you have a, for instance, a schema that's huge and you don't want changes to it going into the bin log, keep your bin log size and quantity down, then that's one way of doing it. Okay. Start. Might have to do a restart actually because I think it's already running. So right now replication might be running, but we're not going to use that. What we're going to do is go over here and do a dump. There are numerous ways you can do a snapshot of your master. I prefer to use MySQL dump at this time, but another way is to lock your tables and copy the actual data files. I'm going to look at maybe doing that because our dumps are taking a long time because we have a ton of data. We have a huge number of feeds stored in our database. MySQL dump can take a long time. Another thing you can do to make your life good is to get a slave whose sole purpose, or a box that's not being read from a lot, that's a slave that you just do dumps from, and use that to do your dumps every night. Then you're not doing a lock tables on your master, because you really, for us, we can't lock our masters for 15 minutes to do a dump. It just would kill us. So we do it on a slave, and then I have some Perl scripts to stop the slave on that slave and get the bin log position to record the bin log position so that when I'm dumping matches that bin log that I'm dumping for, so that it's representative of that data. Mm-hmm. And then I keep that information around, and if I have to restore a slave that dies, I can add the change master into the dump, put a stop slave in there and a start slave at the end, and run that thing so that the dump will restore the slave's data and set back the master information. I actually submitted a patch to MySQL 6.0 that's in there now that, you have --master data. Well, that adds the bin log as if you were to do a show master status. Well, on a slave, that's useless. If I'm doing a dump on the slave and I want to create a restoration dump, a dump that I can use to rebuild a slave, I want the master information of the master that I'm reading from. So I added a change to MySQL dump to get that, so that change master is in there. And also a stop slave is at the beginning and a start slave is at the end. So when I'm going on vacation, I don't want the guys to have to think too much about what do I do if a slave bombs out or dies or whatever. Just take the dump and load it, and it's all back. Everything's happy, and it's replicating properly.
If you don't allocate all your disk space on a Linux box and you have LVM set up, you could also do snapshots.
Yeah, that would be really nice. What do you do that with?
LVM snapshots.
Is that a commercial?
No, it's open source. It's
Oh.
Logical Volume Manager.
And what do you do that while the database is running, or?
You flush the tables, you lock them, take the snapshot.
It's a file system.
It's a file
So
system.
it's like
okay.
ext3, but you have to so when you're partitioning your disks, you can partition it with the logical
Partition
volume
with LVM.
manager.
So you put your data dir on that LVM?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
But you don't use all your disk space. You leave some available, a couple of gigs or something.
Oh, for putting those snapshots.
Putting the snapshots on.
I'm going to get your information too.
Well, could you also do like an rsync while the database is running, lock it at the end, and do another quick rsync after that? I mean, I've done that to move databases from one server to another. I did an rsync while the database was running. I know a lot of the files were inconsistent, but I stopped the database, did another one right after that, and it fixed all the things that were wrong with it in like 2 minutes, and then...
You could. If it works for you, it does. It depends what's going on your master. If your master's churning and burning and you have transactions, I wouldn't advise that. But if it works for you, it depends what your application
It
is.
depends on how much downtime you can have. If you can't have 15 minutes of downtime, but you can have 1 minute of downtime, right, that'll work.
I like the slave option because I can do anything I want with that slave, and I can get you can stop the IO slave and let the slave churn through its relay logs, and then you say, okay, what's the bin log position? That's the bin log of the master I want, and then you can create your master dump that way. That's one way. It ties up that slave, but if you have, I guess it depends what you can afford and what you're looking for.
And you need to do backups somehow anyway. So,
Yeah.
like we usually do a flush tables with our backup. So if we ever have, or flush logs, excuse me, with our backups. If we ever have to make a slave, we can just take that morning's backup at 6 a.m. and then I look at the log file that started at 6 a.m. and I start from there.
Oh. So you flush it at 6 a.m., right?
Right.
You have a multiple master or a single master?
Single master.
Okay, so you have a single master and you run the flush on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that sets your bin logs back to 0, right?
No, that would be reset master. The flush logs just makes a new log.
Oh, I
So
gotcha.
now it's like, you know, log
Right,
bin
okay.
00072 instead of 71. So I just look for the log file that starts there.
Okay, wow, that's another way of doing it. There's a million ways to do these things. Some of them might be a lot better than what I'm doing. I've just always been comfortable with MySQL dump. But you can certainly do
The idea of rsync is similar to how I think the EnoDB hot backup works, which is it takes, because you can use things like MySQL hot copy and things like that to do that. So what it does with the EnoDB stuff is it looks at what position it's at in the binary logs, and then it, gets all the data, and then it applies all the changes from that point to the ending point. So you get inconsistent data. Like, it's not inconsistent data files like you were saying with rsync. It's inconsistent data, and at the end it says, okay, I started at position A, and now I'm at position B, so let me go back to the binary logs and apply all the changes from A to B.
So it does a bin log dump of what happened during the dump, the main dump. It gets yeah,
I mean, I don't know how it works underlying, because it's
yeah.
however many, $500, $600, and it's proprietary. I do.
You need to come to work for Oracle. Anyway. Okay, so we've granted permissions. So now we should be able to, now I have to just do a dump. So I will go see where I am. I'm in root. Just live with this directory. MySQL dump -- master data -- databases Grazer accounts, Grazer server, PL, talk, MySQL. Now if you look at this thing, we get all the nice stuff that's added for compatibility. And right here is what that master data gives you. So this dump is representative of that bin log and that bin log position. We will copy it over. SCP. Actually, I'm going to move that to my home there. Alrighty, so I'll move this somewhere else. I don't want it in the data dir. MySQL rsU root. Well, I'm already root, so okay. MySQL rsU stop slave. We want to stop slave before we run this because it has a change master in it. So it's loaded the data and issued that change master. Then we start the slave, MySQL she show slave status. So unfortunately I cannot scroll, but we see right here that yes, We have slave IO running, slave SQL running, bin log. We go back over here. MySQL SE, show master status. 31,447. 31,447. So we're happy.
By the way, scroll back in that window, shift page up.
Oh, and this window?
I think it should work. Works on a lot of them.
Oh yeah, because it's like a Unix basic terminal. So it'd be nice to have a page up key on here.
It's
Oh, here
like
it is.
function something or other, yeah.
Nah, it's not scrolling. There's probably a way to do it.
Yeah, you can pipe it to less or more. Or...
Okay, we'll do this here so we look at it. So this guy's sitting here waiting for the master to send an event. That's the host there. User. All the positions are good. These are some of the other options. Do we have a pointer? Yes, we do. Oh, no, we don't. See the different options there. You have replicate, do DB, replicate, ignore DB, do table, ignore table, while do table. Those are what you asked about, whether you can be a little more particular about what you're ignoring or replicating. That's what those are. And you would set those in your my.cnf. Skip counter is 0. I can show you how to break replication in a little bit, and you'll see how that comes in handy. I'm good at breaking replication.
There's just so many ways to do it.
So, okay, please, are those for specifying single tables or list of tables? Do you count something? The wild card?
This one right here is an entire database. Ignore entire database, table, ignore
Individual
table.
single table.
Yeah. This one you can have fun with. You can use wildcard, percentage, you know, like, say you have a...
So you can match or you can give single tables, but it doesn't allow you to say put it in a list of tables.
The table name.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Table name, comma, table name.
Inside your my.cnf, you could specify this multiple times. Just like, did you see when I was setting up mine, I had the 3 ones listed of the same option? It just builds up a list.
That's good to come.
Yeah, I'll show you in this other window. This other window is a little confusing because it has that bug where it duplicates it, but for instance, you're not seeing that. So we got, you would list it just like this.
I see. And it will show up. It's constantly like that.
Exactly, and then inside of MySQL, SQL-e, show slave status. You can definitely pipe this through, yes.
What's the meaning of the backslash?
So this comes out listed like that rather than in the T.
See here, you have it listed in comma.
But does it work properly, or just, I mean,
Yeah.
is it duplicating the replication, or is it just duplicating the text?
This, I think I don't know what the nature of the bug is. This particular one seems to be working fine, but I did run into a situation where it was breaking on me, and it was causing me a lot of grief. For instance, I would get an update from Grazer server running on Grazer accounts, and it would break replication because that table wouldn't exist on Grazer accounts. And I submitted I went into my #MySQL dev channel, and I asked one of the guys, I said, have you seen this before? And he said, upgrade MySQL. I said, okay. And I did, and the problem went away. Never had it again. I issued an edict at work. There's no discussion, I'm upgrading. So, what do we have next? So, we have replication running, so there's still one database we're replicating that's not yet created, and I'll show you replication working in action here. MySQL test, go to test. Okay, show databases. So we don't see it on there. MySQL test, show databases. Now, this guy has a different batch of databases on him. He has the food databases, but the only 2 ones being replicated are Grazer accounts and Grazer server, and then this one that I'm going to create database, RPL test. So, if everything's working correctly, we should see that here now. RPL test. And to just kind of see what's going on under the scene, MySQL bin log, user, I'm already here. Relay log, relay.02. So if you look here, create database RPL test, so it did its thing. That was the query that created this, being that this is statement-based. MySQL-u RPL test, show tables. Be so glad if they can figure out how to get it so that you don't have to hit Control Option, create, connect RPL test, create table T1 int ID int. So, we have that table now. Hooray. Links are from T1. And we're going to put some records in there, and then I'll show you how we can break it and how we can fix it. It's a very simple brain-dead example, but gives you a start to how to think about how to fix things. Insert into T1. Values this, and here, pull this over on that. Let's see what I'm typing. That, whoops. Now we've inserted 3 rows. So we see all of these guys here. See over here too as well. Our tables are now in sync. I'm going to show you what happens when they become out of sync. Okay. I'm going to manually insert something into here. Into T1. This is on the slave. So, on your slave, you want to make sure all your users cannot write to the slave. Value, T1, values. So we have,
you have your increments.
but we can override that.
Why didn't it, when it created it, create the increments?
Because we didn't do the, because on the slave we don't worry about that. We're getting our information from the master for what it should be. Let me think about that a sec.
Yes, but the master created the table and it was replicated over to the slave to create the table. You didn't create the table by hand over the slave.
It was not the creation of the table that sets the ID. So it's taking the last.
Yeah, it's not doing the auto increment. You want, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. Auto increment is replicated in such a way that the master takes care of giving you the values. You don't need to do the auto increment on the slave.
What does the table definition look like on the slave?
The table definition.
It's still an auto increment column. It's
But it sets itself back to an auto increment of 1 by default, and it reads the last value, which is a 21, and goes to a 22.
I believe, actually, if you look at the binary log, I believe it'll tell you the answer. I believe the binary log does things like shows you the last insert ID.
Let me do that. Oh, the binary log. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, set insert ID equal 1. Do you see that there? That actually puts it in there for you.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So that set insert ID equals 1 right before that at 34 in the middle of the page there. That is actually setting that auto increment ID.
I've never looked at this. I just know I don't run the, oh, okay, insert ID equals 1, okay. I just know that unless I'm running a master, I don't do any of the offset or any of that. I let the master take care of that for me.
Right.
When you increment by value, is that something that you might have set as a global value someplace? Because it's incrementing by 10 on one of them.
Right, yeah, that's here by Etsy.
Okay, so the two different systems have different.
I'm going to show you my multi-master.
Defaults.
So we have,
You set one to be 1 and the other to be 10.
with multi-master, you use something like MySQL demulti to start.
Yeah.
Move this over here. So you tell it what your MySQL admin, your MySQL D is, and we're using MySQL D save. We have MySQL D1 right here, and all this information for the different settings. InnoDB, the data dir here is data 1, server ID 1. But we go down here, auto increment 10,
So
offset
on your slate, you
1.
don't have it set that way. That's all.
No, I let the master give me that because it's the master that's giving me that information. For MySQL D2,
The master is not giving you
It's
the
not-
auto increment. That
It's just giving you the key that it's assigned.
It's the master is giving you the number in the binary log. So when it reads from the binary log, can you look
It's giving the assigned key.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, that's what you were saying,
That's what I'm
yes.
saying. It's giving you the assigned key, so it doesn't calculate the next one.
So the replication doesn't know whether the master got it by auto incrementing it or you manually set that.
Right, replication just sees the number.
Yeah.
and I can play around with it and show you what you get if you go to the other master and do it, and what it comes out as. Server ID 2, 10 and 1. Uh-oh, wait a minute. Okay, we got a little problem here, Houston. Okay, we're going to make this other one too. That's what it should be. Okay. Let's see how it works. Okay. Well, back to showing you how to break it. We've inserted that record into the slave here. So we go over to this.
And you have name defined as unique?
Pardon?
You have name defined as unique?
Not name, we're going to do it with ID. I'm going to manually set ID. You can do that with auto increment. MySQL SU root. We could do that with name if we wanted to, but just use this as a test. RPL test, X star from T1, insert to T1 values, to rows. That just ran nicely here, but over here, we should have a broken slave now. So, duplicate entry. So now you can see the slave SQL is not running. The IO is running, it's still trying to read from the master, but this guy is not going to work.
So does it just stop at this point, or does it bypass?
No, it stops unless you have replicate.
Slave skip errors?
Yeah, slave skip errors. Yeah, slave skip errors set to whatever you want.
You can do it all, or like 1062 is the one for duplicate keys. Is it 1062? I think so. Or 1602, not 2.
I think so.
1062. I think it's right.
1062 is the error number right there.
Oh, well then that's the one.
Yes, that is.
I'm just remembering from the errors header file.
But again, right, do you really want to do that? Would you
No, I
rather
just
have
was curious
replication
whether-
break? No, I'm saying, there are some people that in production might actually want to skip those kinds of errors, but in general, right? That's not
I
your
do.
default configuration.
Because I get those duplicate errors. We've looked at the app and I don't know where they're coming from, and I think it has to do with the latency somehow. There's probably some cleaning up I need to do.
At the same time, this thing just stops dead.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
bad.
And it requires manual intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
your boss calls you and he's really stressed.
Right.
So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to fix it now. So this command will be one of your best friends. We'll go ahead and stop slave completely. We'll stop both of them.
The one thing you didn't show on this, on the slave status, it will tell you how far behind your slave is.
Oh, yeah, I will get back to that.
How far behind what, since how many rows, how
Many seconds?
Actually, since it's the
It
last,
does.
since it's the last one listed,
Yeah.
I'll do it right now.
It does seconds, but again, this is another one of those places where you have to be careful of, because it's kind of a hack. Well, this says seconds behind master null because it doesn't know where the master is. The way that it figures out the seconds behind master is, you know how you have the two threads, the one thread that reads from the relay log and the one thread that actually executes the statements from it? It takes the last position in the relay log and looks at the timestamp for that position.
the timestamp of what it is now?
And it's the timestamp of the last entry in the relay log, which if you have a very big lag in replication, right, if you have a very slow connection that you're getting the relay logs over, you might end up having like a, delay of 0 because it thinks it's at the end of the relay log that it can see. So the way it does it is it gets the timestamp of where the exec is and where the end of the relay
show you
is, and it
guys something.
subtracts.
If
So
I can
it's
get there.
pretty accurate, but not always. And it's also one of those, if you have a really long statement and then nothing for 10 minutes and then another statement,
Yeah.
it's going to think it's 10 minutes behind, and then you're like, oh my god, it's 10 minutes behind, and then 5
There
seconds
really
later.
wasn't any work in that thing.
Yeah, exactly. 5 seconds later, it's caught up, and you're like, oh. So. It can be misleading, but it's usually it's a good gauge.
As long as you understand what it's doing.
Yeah.
It's not working the way it should. The key should let me in. Or if it's because I'm coming in from here.
Because the key is based on the IP address, and the IP address has changed.
Well, I go all over the place and
No, it's not letting him do his password though. That's not a
should
man
be
in the middle
using my
attack kind
key.
of
I don't
thing.
know. Oh, I know. The SSH agent's probably not running. See if I can get in this way. It's going to do the same thing. I was going to show you the monitoring tool I use. I use RepMon, and it gives me kind of a listing of how much of a lag there is. And I have noticed, you're talking about strangeness in the way it reports those seconds. I just noticed the other day when we were really lagging. One time it would say 4,000, the next time it would say 100. And it would,
Yeah.
I didn't know what was causing that. We were pulling our hair out trying to figure that out. And then one of the boxes ran out of disk space. So this command right here is one of your best friends, global SQL slave skip counter.
So do you use an NTP client to set the time then on all the servers?
Yeah, that's another thing I should have mentioned. I'm sorry I didn't mention it. You want to make sure all your servers are the same time, and also GMT. NTP client is one way to do it. There are other ways of doing it, but you want to make sure they're...
But you don't have to, because it's not going to replicate. When it replicates like a statement like now or current date, it actually sets the timestamp before that.
Does it replicate the actual value that the master has?
Oh yeah, if you look in
Oh,
the
okay.
do a MySQL bin log, and it will say set, just like it's in set last insert ID or set insert ID, it'll say set timestamp, and that actually is like before every single statement, whether or not it uses a time-based thing. Just to make sure that when you do things like now, insert into blah now,
That's
that
good.
now is the same now.
That's good to know. I wonder, yeah, if you're doing row-based, then obviously you're definitely going to just get that content.
Right.
Yeah. That's good, because we had a situation the other day, one of our boxes was eating up memory, and it was NTP date for some reason had a bunch of stale.
Yeah.
It was just eating up memory. We didn't know what it was.
I have no idea what would happen if it was inserting things into the future like MySQL doesn't really check for those things, but you might have some application error if you're if you're 5 days behind on your server. MySQL will probably happily insert it, but taking it out might be another problem. Your application might break because it's going to be like, I don't understand. The dates don't match up. So, yeah.
So this command is something that will make your life really good, right on the back of your hand.
So that
Tattoo
just
it.
tells it to skip one error?
Yeah,
It's
And you could
skip
run
one
that
statement.
multiple times if there were 2 or 3 errors in a row?
there were 2 or 3 errors, and I've had hundreds of errors, and you just, you gotta fix the problem beyond that.
Or, set the slave skip error to 1062 and then...
Or you can change the one inside the my.cnf and then
Right.
get it working so that things aren't on complete
Right.
fire. But then you run the risk that your slaves might end up not having the same count as your master.
Right, they're going to end up as...
Um,
right, the best
and
thing
I
to do
have
is
seen
solve
it.
the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Well, just, what do you mean solve the problem?
Whatever problem is causing,
Yeah, I mean, the fact is
he broke it.
yeah.
So something happened that they got at the sink.
Your application somehow is writing to the slave. Some guy felt brave
Which,
about
if you
using
would
it.
have started it with read-only, which might be a good option to show,
So
right?
once you do fix the problem, you're gonna have to put the 2 databases in sync.
What is that?
Once you do fix the problem that caused the slave to die,
Yes.
if you've done this, you're not perfectly sure that the 2 databases are exactly the same.
You know what I do is I write a Perl script and I get a list of all the tables on the master and then I go around all my slaves and I compare the counts on those.
Which, that still doesn't work because it can be...
Yeah,
it can
right,
get a
yeah.
sync. But what you can actually do is, there's actually a MySQL toolkit written by Baron Schwartz that actually has something called MySQL table checksum. And it will actually do a checksum of the tables. And then it actually also has the capability of
Here.
doing the... well, one of these days we'll get Baron here. We'll fly him in from Virginia. But his toolkit it's really great. Actually, do you want to bring up a web browser? Are you planning
Let's maybe try that now.
I'm actually really curious about that. I tried using MySQL table sync.
Yeah, MySQL
You
table
have to
sync is
register
really...
as a visitor
There's a
and
lot
wait
of
15
configuration.
before you
Oh,
do
I
it.
didn't
Very
even do that.
slow,
Okay.
right, if you don't
All right.
Yeah.
the right options.
Scratch
And it
that
can
one.
be very slow if you do give it the right options because it has to do even doing a checksum on the table. But so MySQL table sync, which I forget your name, David just mentioned, will actually sync up the tables for you and put in the missing data if there's missing
Yeah,
data.
that would...
And this is
render
all in the
util?
toolkit?
Is that what?
Which you
Is that
probably don't want to
toolkit
do
or
this
just a command?
Cool to have
The
Yeah,
toolkit
come
is a
down
set
here on a rainy day
of
and
little
hang out
programs
at a
like
coffee
that.
shop. How
So
far
yeah,
is
it's
their
called the MySQL
wireless go
toolkit,
there?
although he's probably changing the name soon.
He was in my car. I was at the
Sourceforge.net/project/MySQL toolkit, all one word.
You said it was...
Okay, I know about that. I just didn't
Sure.
know.
Sourceforge.net/projects/MySQL toolkit.
I think what we can do is after today, I'll email Cherie and we'll get a list together of all kinds of resources for replication
Fun links, yeah.
tools like that. There are little things you don't know about if you're so focused on your problem that you don't know all these nice little ways of doing things. You could probably find it if you Google, but
But sometimes you have to know what to look for too.
sometimes you have a situation where you have a data set over here and a data set over here, and how do you figure out the delta? How do you get those merged? It's just a nightmare. You got to pick one and not worry about losing the other one.
Right, and the count trick works, but it won't necessarily work if you missed one and then it also added, like if you have a multi-master scenario where you're dropping.
Or even in this scenario where it was a different value.
Right.
Yeah.
When he added those as the value of both of them, what if it wasn't the value?
Right,
It's
exactly.
really a duplicate key, but it's not a duplicate row.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, it does sound like this, the checksum is to say just something.
Yeah.
If you're using checksum though, don't these tables have to be identical types? I mean, is it really checksumming the actual file itself? I mean,
Yeah, that's a
one's
good question.
InnoDB and one is
Is it doing it
on
on the
ISIN,
MyD file or
and
the
then
My
checksum on the
solution-
actual physical.
No, it's not using the files. It's a checksum of the actual contents of the data.
Right.
Yeah. So
It
actually
is,
checks-
however, open source, so if you want to look and see what it's doing, you can, but you said it's doing,
It actually does, it's all in SQL, basically. It's
Okay.
all in SQL, so it's doing queries and generating like hashes and everything like that.
Wow.
It must be incredibly slow.
It's fairly slow. I haven't gotten it to work efficiently. I wanted to use it for on a regular
Cleaning
basis
house.
to sync development machines with production data, and I couldn't get it working fast enough to be useful, but maybe I just wasn't using it right. But
So am I not the only one who ends up with situations where my data's not all the same, and
well, no,
it's kind of nice, it's like
it's
support
pretty much
group.
standard in the industry, really. But yeah, read-only, there's an option called read-only that you can put in the my.cnf, which will make it so that only the root user can write to things.
Oh.
Or anyone, not the root user, anyone with super privilege. So
Okay.
that if the application tries to write, it's going to get denied.
Yeah, so nobody could update the slaves by accident.
Other than
yeah.
Well,
Because other than,
Other than somebody with super
Replication
user
master.
privileges, and if you give your application user super privileges, then they can do it. So,
Some people have situations where they have some data on their replicates that they don't want on their master. So you'd still need write privileges.
yep. Yep.
say again?
Like in our situation, we've got our master database and we've got replicas. One of the replicas is specifically for reporting, and we've got tables just for reporting on there. So you'd still want write privileges.
Oh, right.
The reporting database isn't up here.
But if you're replicating,
That reporting database is only down on the slave, not on the master.
Are you making
oh,
changes to
okay, I
that
see what you're saying.
replicated
'Cause it's a
data?
global read-only. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
We're making changes to the reporting DB on the slave. It only exists on that one slave. But everything else is replicated.
Does that make the data different than what's,
No. All the
No,
stuff
the-
that gets replicated is still the same. It's just there's one database down here.
Right. Read-only is a
Oh.
global.
oh,
read-only
you're
is
saying a
global.
database that's not,
Right,
okay,
so
I
you
got
don't-
it.
You may not
Like a
want,
summary
You may not
database.
want read-only on there.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
That's true. But in that case, you would do something like not give you your application password, the rights to that, table, database. Yeah, there's a lot of weird things. I've also noticed the thing with like binlog do DB, that's on the master, which kind of makes sense, but I'd also really, there's the replicate do DB, which I didn't know for a while, and it was kind of like, why can't I set it on the slave? There's two places you could set it, so you can get yourself into trouble if you're like, okay, I want to replicate everything, but it's not replicating everything. Well, now you have to look at the master. You know what I mean? Because the master might only be logging certain things. So you definitely want to be careful if you're doing that kind of stuff. But there's options like read-only sometimes where you want it to be global and you don't want it to be global. So just know what you're getting into and document it so that a year later you'll realize, oh, yeah, I did that.
I had this one issue, and I don't know if it's been fixed, but if you do something, they said somebody in one of the channels said don't use replicate do DB, use wildcard, because I had a situation where I had a query that joined to another database. It did an update where it joined against a table in the test database, for instance, and that database was referenced, test dot whatever was referenced in the query being replicated to the slave, and that broke replication. And the reason it did that is that with the wildcard, it parses out anything that references something that's not there and doesn't replicate it, to my understanding, whereas do DB does.
Oh, so the exclude using the wildcard.
Yeah. Yeah, or even the one using the wildcard. Because, say if you have Grazer dot whatever tables, the Grazer dot percentage, if it's test dot something, that's not going to make it through replication.
Oh, so the statement doesn't make it because you're not replicating the test database.
Yeah. The wildcard stuff is you can use sort of not regular expressions, but you can really kind of be particular about what you're replicating as opposed to replicate do DB, which you have to give it a complete name.
The other thing is when you do replicate by databases, it goes by what database it's currently in. So if you say like use test and then do, insert into test2.foo, it will actually replicate that statement.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where the wildcard prevents
that's
that.
kind of a hack. That's one of the ways in which replication is hacking, right? So it doesn't actually figure out what changed. Did that test database change? Because that's, I've replicated you to be test, let's say, but not test2. it doesn't actually say what was changed. Oh, it was a table in test. Let me replicate that. What it says was, where am I? I'm in the test database. So even if you use the dot notation to access another database and change that one, like if you do create table test2.foo and whatever, it'll actually replicate that because you were in the test database at the time. Similarly, if you're in the test2 database and change something in the test database using the dot notation, it's not going to replicate.
Right, because test
So.
2 is not in the list to be.
Right. This is why
What about
usually
row-based?
Huge.
yeah, hack, yeah.
What would
That's
Hack, no.
that's yeah. That's why I usually just replicate everything, and then if I have a server where I don't want everything to be replicated, I'll make it a 5 server and run like all the other tables altered to black hole. So I'm just like, I just want these tables.
But you don't usually replicate the MySQL database, right?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I usually will replicate it, but I might change the values after I start replication, just because. Usually I want the same thing if it's an application. But if it happens to be like a reporting database where I want things different, then I'll change it after.
The do wildcard fixes this.
Yeah.
That's what the
the
guy
do
in the
wildcard
support
does
channel,
fix.
he said do DB's broken. That's what he said. I forget who told me that, but
But if you don't use the GDB, but use specific named tables or wildcards, you say that is.
the wildcard is the only one where you can do it like a percentage, kind of. You could glob it. That's what I mean. You can glob it and put.
Yeah. And again, it has the same things, right? If you're in something that's completely different, it won't actually, But the thing is, if you change your schema, right? Like you were asking, is it better to do replicate do DB or is it better to do it by tables? Well, it depends. I mean, if you never change your schema, then do it by tables. If you're add a table and you want that to replicate automatically.
Yeah,
then
like
you
we
probably
did here,
wanna
we
do
created a database and it replicated that.
So.
That's if I had just started up the master and I didn't even specify binlog and do the dump, it would automatically have created all the tables on that master. If it was the first time I had started the master and the slave at the same time. But since this master's been here forever, I've had it running for 8 months. I did the dump. So this statement, though, this is how you clear it. But you have to run start slave again.
You have to stop the slave before you do it?
I could have done it without stopping the slave because the IO slave was already down, but I figured stop it all together and just make sure that it's happy. I'm very...
So if you do a select on the table, what is the shortcut?
let me show you...
So 2 tables.
Oh, I'll show you the data.
Probably still out of sync, you just want to skip the error.
Well, but he happens to insert one that's the same. So
Maybe just skip here.
1. Okay. We go back over here. See if I have it in my history. Oh, just type it. HTML-E. PL test. Select start from T1. Just denied. Okay, I'm going to use my other window because it's already got it. So it's exactly the same, and that was, like you said, we could have had a situation where I put anything in name. I could have put any value.
It would have to be the same.
Yeah, it's the ID that caused this error to occur. But now, if everything cleared out correctly, I'm going to do the pretty print.
So
Well,
what
we can
happens
kind of
if
read
you,
this.
If you, instead of setting that SQL slave strip counter equals 1, you just go and delete it
So
back.
leave the offending row from the slave.
Yeah.
Say again?
What if you did?
It won't clear the error.
It won't
That
clear
error
the
is going to exist.
You
Yes.
can't get it to start up
Keep it
again
in.
and try again?
Well, why don't you try it? I think
Yeah,
if you
let's do
do
it.
a slave stop, if you do a slave start, if you delete it and do a slave start, I think it will work.
Okay.
Because the
I
conflict isn't
haven't
there,
had
but it
much
won't
luck in that
automatically.
regard.
You have to delete the row manually, do a slave start. But of course, that's also updated the auto increment. So if you put in Right, 23. If you delete 22 and then put in 22, it'll work. But if you delete 22 and then just insert the next one, you'll get 23. Because it's already updated the auto increment. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, let's see, I don't know if this will.
Oh, it goes to 31 there.
Wait a minute, T1, name. If the auto increment was what it should be, yes, should be broken. We should have a nice little paragraph of happiness. Yes, here duplicate entry, 31 for key 1. So, like you said, select star from key 1, delete
Right, you
from...
have to, does the slave stop automatically when it gets an error?
Yeah. In
Oh.
fact, if you look at the show slave status again, you'll see you can see the two threads and whether or not they're running.
The IO thread is the one that's stopped. The SQL thread's still running.
If you can set your pager
How do you do that?
\P.
Okay, P.
No, you have to do it at its
Oh.
own command, its own line, yeah. Or \. I think it's capital P.
Can you do pager less?
Yeah. Oh, that's what \P does. You could just type pager instead of, so if you do less, space less.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's nice to know. I just usually have a big enough terminal that it's not a problem.
Can you post it?
Yeah.
Actual slave status.
Actually, I
G.
think if you type question mark at
nice.
the command prompt, you get all that.
Okay, so we can see right here, slave IO is running. Oh, slave IO is running this time. It's weird because last time it failed, the slave IO was not running, and the SQL slave was running. But one of them is down.
The slave IO is the IO waiting
That's reading
for the
from the
master.
bin
That's
log.
reading from the. So you can see the slave IO state is waiting for the master to send event. That's what's reading the relay log. So that's going just fine. So the slave SQL, the thing that executes the statement, is not running. Slave IO is
Because
running.
it's unhappy about this
So
error.
this is the status we really want it to be, right?
No. Well, we don't want it to be broken.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, in order to do this test, we
Right.
want it,
Right. Exactly.
So-
If you do a show process list, you'll actually see only one of the threads, not both of them.
Okay, we'll go over show process. That's the other thing I was going to show you on the master. We go control. Okay, system user. Slave IO thread update. Waiting for the slave IO thread to update.
Right.
Alright, go back here. Alright, so what was the idea? We were going to
Delete
delete
the offending record and then restart it and see if it fixes it.
I don't think that it will because it's already failed and,
Well, you have to do slave start.
okay.
But if you do slave start, I think it will actually work.
Oh, you
Don't delete the record.
well, somebody has to do it here.
I don't think,
Hmm?
well, we'll try it.
Yeah.
Select
It
start
actually
from
depends what
T1.
the actual query is.
Delete.
It's trying to insert it.
Delete.
But I think
T1.
because of the ID.
Wow, okay. I stand
Do a
corrected.
select start from T1 again, see if it's there,
Yeah, you can see SQL slave running too is now yes.
and see if it put
So,
in the
yeah.
right value for that one.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
It says master name.
Yes.
Wow,
Yep.
I've never had that luck.
Wow.
I've always had, I've stopped, I've done all kinds of things, but sometimes you don't know what was inserted.
Right.
You have a million rows of data and where,
Well, it gives you the duplicate key value. Totally.
yeah, you're right.
Well, let's try
But
this. Let's try
well,
this.
what happens is though it gives you, it says for keys, for key 1, it says
Yeah.
like duplicate key error block for key 1.
Yeah.
So you have to go back to a show create table, see which key is the first key,
Yeah.
and then figure it out. So a lot of times it's easier to do a skip because you see the process list and you're like, yeah, okay, that user ID or that primary key was already there. Just skip that one. Sometimes it's easier to skip it than to figure out what was on the master and delete it from the table like we just did.
So I have a question here. What if we deleted another row on the site?
you deleted a row on the slave to make it out of sync, would it fix it?
Yeah.
Nope.
No.
That's the problem.
Past that point of the
It's
That's
saying
what
I
we'll
can't
find
insert
out,
it,
like a check
stops the
table or a
thread.
Yes.
table, right?
Exactly.
And then you clear it, and you
Yeah.
start the thread again, and it says, oh, I can insert it now, and it keeps going. But if you delete it, it doesn't care. That's your problem, buddy. You messed up your slave.
So there isn't a simple command to just say,
It's not a
Just-
sync, it's a replicate.
yeah.
And it's just replicating the statement. I mean,
Yeah,
with
right.
row-based replication,
Row.
you're not going to get, if you delete a row, you're not going to get it back unless that row is updated then on the master,
Duplicate
right?
entry 41 for
Because it's
Q1.
asynchronous. You don't have two tables going, are you the same, are you the same? You have one thread going, what did you do to
Yeah,
change your
because
data?
You keep doing deltas.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no way to say like, do a.
Entry 41. So it does give you the key value
Yeah,
here.
you can't get the, like, the
Right, but it says
total
for key
complete state
one,
of the original.
so you would have to
Whereas,
go
like,
to that
Yeah.
table, look at the thing, see
Yeah.
which value has key one of 41.
Yeah.
Right, which is, okay, so key one's going to be your primary key if your table has a primary key, but what happens when it's key 3? I mean, I've run into this. It's like key
Yeah.
3 is duplicate entry, and if you have if you have multiple fields in that key, then you get like duplicate entry 41-2742 for key 3, and you're like, forget it, just skip that one.
So if you were trying to delete, if the master did a delete, and it went over to the slave and the row was not there, would that be considered an error, or would you just say,
Yes.
okay, well, there's nothing to delete?
No,
Well,
no,
what,
no.
well,
No,
what would
that would be
happen?
an
No, what would happen if you deleted from a table and the row didn't exist?
That's pretty cool.
Did you get an error?
No.
Okay, yeah, that's
So
exactly what
I'm
happened.
assuming that you would not get an error.
Correct.
That's what
If
I'm
you
saying.
say delete from table where username equals Shiri and there's no username equals Shiri, you don't get
Well, then
an
you're
error.
pretty much in sync anyway.
You're in sync, right, if you're in sync, I'm just saying that, but if you go,
Well-
I'm hoping that that would not create an error, that's what I was hoping.
No, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
It acts just like it's running the SQL just like that. So, yeah. You kind of probably would want to know when your things are out of sync, but
Yeah.
But as you point out, it's deleted, okay, it's already gone.
but it's different for update, right?
Yeah.
If you want to, update user set type equals paid where username is Shiri and somebody went and deleted my username on the
It
slave.
won't catch that as an error either.
Nope, it'll say I successfully updated 0 rows.
Right.
It's not great for the bank.
Not great for customer service when I call and I say, how come, what happened to my account? And they go, I don't know, because when I look on the master, you're fine.
But it seems that in all the normal use cases, you want the slave to be read-only. And then, if you want to do something that the slave has right, it seems that there's a problem here. You can't do per table read-only, right? Because if you only read only those tables that are replicated, and then every table is right?
But you can actually do per column right, because you have the ACLs in the database. So you can change the, per server, you can change what tables a user can see, right? So, yeah, in the my.cnf, right, that's kind of the place for global stuff, right? You wouldn't want to put which tables are read-only in the my.cnf, right? You wouldn't want to have to restart it. You change the ACLs in the grants tables, change the grants.
Okay.
So-
You can do it that way, and then the administrator could create right, but and all the normal users would only have read-only for the tables that you're replicating.
Right, that's exactly what
Well, the way we did it
this
is
man whose name I forgot,
yeah,
Matt was
We-
saying earlier that.
we try and keep that stuff in separate databases on the slaves. We don't want to mix, like if you're replicating a database, you don't want to put a table in that database, it's not up top.
Yeah, just have a separate.
We've had developers try and do that, they're trying something down here,
Yeah.
create a table, then they realize they want to recreate it on the master to go to all the other slaves, and then that breaks replication. Well, it breaks replication on that slave where they first created it.
I just did that last week because I typed in the wrong window. I thought I was adding a test one to my, on my desktop, and I was actually adding it to a slave, and, then when we went and put it into production, it went through and broke the slave, so.
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one.
Insert ignore into is your friend in those cases, but yeah. Or insert on duplicate key update.
So, I've shown you how to break replication.
And how to fix it.
let's look at, if you'd like to look at, and show you this dual master setup that I have here. Hopefully I've got the auto increment set up working correctly for the other master. So I'm going to change this, the dash S command here. Tim. MySQL 2.sock. I'm going to do a select star from T1. So this guy has what he needs. Insert into T1. Well, this guy did it correctly. He went to 2. But he's not doing the 10 apart. I got to figure that out. But hopefully everything that was sent in correctly. And to get a dual master working, you have to add those instances to your my.cnf file and specify them as separate instances.
Now you're saying that if you insert into this, that one, what do you in the back? You insert into there, it'll go back to this window in the front here?
Pardon?
Is that pointing to each other?
This guy is...
You insert into either one of them and they'll
Yep.
mirror each other?
This one replicates to the first instance we were working on this screen, which then replicates to this slave. And it's funny, we have more masters than we do slaves. Well, they're all slaves, essentially. I'll show you the my.cnf and how you set up your MySQL D multi. That was something I kind of pulled my hair out trying to get working correctly. First thing you need is you need a MySQL D multi section inside your my.cnf.
And that's not there by default, right? You have to pull that out of somewhere like your hat.
Yeah, you have to do a lot of reading around, and I think the MySQL D multi script has some comments in it. It's a Perl script, I think, and the last time I looked at it, I think it might have had something in there that said what you have to do. You have to basically identify what your MySQL D is. You're using MySQL D safe as kind of a proxy or whatever you want to call it. MySQL admin, the user root. Probably.
You can put in most of the stuff that you can put in under the regular MySQL D directive. You can put in MySQL D _ multi. For instance, if you have, say, a different IP, let's say you have 3 IPs on it, and you want the port to be 3306 on all 3 of them, you can actually move that in the MySQL D multi section.
Oh, okay.
It's just basically it just means that all of them inherit the stuff from there.
Correct. So, and then the only caveat is that see how he has MySQL D1? That has to be MySQL D and a number.
Yeah.
So you can't say like MySQL, happy or something.
It has to be a numeric value, and then the next one can be a different numeric value than this guy. So the key parts here is we have our port 3306. Everything is the same as far as the tuning parameters. The data dir, the InnoDB data home dir, those are different. We're using data 1. The main data dir, we're using your local MySQL var data 1, server ID 1. Oh, yeah, I have slave skip errors set on this one. I probably don't need that.
So does that server ID, you need to match the numbers that's up on the MySQL data?
No.
It doesn't have to match, it just has to be different across servers. Like this one has to be 1, the next one has to be something other than this, and so on and so
That's
forth.
what you need, but they don't have to match internally.
Right. If you wanted MySQL D2 to have a server ID of 1 and MySQL D1 to have a server ID of 2, you can. If you wanted MySQL D1 to have a server ID of 75, we can have that.
What I do is we have API 1, API 2, and I match the IDs to that. That way I can remember when I'm looking at it which application server it is.
I actually do it by the last octet of the IP address.
Oh.
Because we don't have more than 255 servers. So what we do is we, if the, IP is, 192.168.1.20, the server ID will be 20. and then it'll be MySQL D20.
Okay.
And that is just an easy way for me to,
I like that.
As long as we don't, we aren't doing different, say, subnets.
right, well, and that's
Trying
what, that's what
to
said, we
match
don't have more
the
than
stuff like
255 machines, yeah. Well, and different subnets are okay,
We have
because
different data centers.
they're not gonna, but as long as they don't talk to each other, they're fine. I'm sure somewhere out there, there's a machine with a server ID of 1, right, but it's not on the same subnet, so. I don't know if that will work forever, but we do have that in, we have in our office machines and our production environment, we have different namespaces, and it works just fine. But,
And I guess that would be based on what your subnet mask is. If you had a Class B
That's
subnet
true.
mask, you could go up above, you know,
this is true.
Oh, and the offset you set in here too. That's the other thing.
Yep.
10.1. The master port is 3307. Now if we go down here,
What's the largest server number you have?
I don't know. I forget. You mean as far as the server ID?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Probably an int, but probably 655.
One of the header files.
More than most of us will ever
I don't know, I've
Hopefully
got a
I will
Class
never
A to
exceed
play
that
with,
number. I'd hate to manage that.
I mean, we can easily try it by editing and restarting the thing and seeing if it
Yeah,
works.
why not?
Yeah.
But the only thing is MySQL multi doesn't come with a stop. You can do MySQL multi start, but stop doesn't.
Yeah, it does.
It does, but it doesn't work.
Mine does.
Oh, well,
It took a while. I had to edit.
I just edited it and said for each thing that has a socket file, go in and do a MySQL admin shutdown.
Yeah, I think I edited it until it works, and I forget what it was. I think it had something to do with the permission that I was running it at. Oh, it was the user.
Aryan
See up there?
Yep.
How I had the user root? You're gonna have
Oh, yeah.
user root. That's how you gotta get it to work.
Right, because it has to start at the, okay. Aryan Lentz, who runs OpenQuery, which is a consulting
Aryan.
firm down in,
Tell them, say, oi.
Boy.
Oi, mate.
He says it's a 32-bit unsigned int.
Okay.
So you have, a lot of namespace for that server ID.
Anyhow, we see here the auto increment is still the same, but the offset is 2 this time around. And I don't know why this number is not working for us, because we saw, oh, I know why. Because if I were to do another insert from that master, it will be the right number. I'll show you what I mean in a sec here. Let's see, insert, maybe 2, again. Select star from T1. Okay, so it did it right this time. The reason it was 42 is,
You got it from the other side.
got it from from those.
Yep. That was the next increment ID was set to.
Yeah.
Right, so it was, when he made it 22, the next increment ID after that was 32, but then after putting 41, it increased to the next one.
Yeah.
Oh, so it used the value it would have, so it jumps 10 ahead to the next one after that?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, so if your last value is 31, then normally it would be 32, but since we came in ahead of it,
Right, you have to go
41,
past
yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it requires a little bit of thinking. I do it every day, but I still have to think about it. So we'll go back to the comp. Well, that was pretty much the comp file. And then look at MySQL multi. Okay, MySQL multi. A couple copies here and there. Which one am I running? Anyhow, we see here the auto increment is still the same, but the offset is 2 this time around. And I don't know why this number is not working for us, because we saw, oh, I know why. Because if I were to do another insert from that master, it will be the right number.
Great.
I'll show you what I mean in a sec here. Let's see, insert, maybe 2, again. Select star from T1. Okay, so it did it right this time. The reason it was 42 is
You got it from the other side.
got it from from those.
Yep. that was the next increment ID was set to,
Yeah.
right, so it was, when he made it 22, the next increment ID after that was 32, but then after putting 41, it increased to the next
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Oh, so it used the value it would have, so it jumps 10 ahead to the next one after that?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So if your last value is 31, then normally it would be 32, but since we came in ahead of it,
Right, you have to go
41,
past
yeah.
it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it requires a little bit of thinking. I do it every day, but I still have to think about it. So we'll go back to the comp. Well, that was pretty much the comp file. And then look at MySQL multi. Okay, MySQL multi. A couple copies here and there. Which one am I running? Probably going to look at this one. When you compile MySQL, whatever prefix you compile it as, all your scripts get that put into the path of how they usually run. Yeah, it's a Perl script. So I think what this does is it parses through the my.cnf and just kind of starts MySQLD in such a way. I think. Not sure. It's a little bit too much code to look through right now.
It's pretty lengthy.
Would you guys, I know you guys have been good with questions all night. Are there any other questions you'd like to ask? You can ask me any kind of questions you like. It doesn't have to be about replication. Well, about MySQL.
Oh.
Can you answer this question? Does the password show across the wire? I haven't put a sniffer on it yet, but when you go to a federated table has a definition of how you connect to the client, and then it is the password in the actual table definition. Does that show in clear text as it goes across the wire to connect to the client?
Whatever the client would use is whatever it does. If you were to just write a C program or a DVD program, it shouldn't. No. No, it's not sending the password. All federated does is you issue a query, and then at the storage engine level, it converts it into an SQL statement. And then it retrieves the data and converts the data into, it retrieves the data in a result set and takes that and converts it to the internal table handler format that I drew up there. The same format that row-based replication uses. And then it displays it as results. The new version of 5.1, I'll show you the syntax.
The only thing that I'm finding online is that people are saying if you have it, it's stored in the table definition.
It's stored in the table definition. That doesn't concern me. These are closed boxes.
Right.
These are black boxes no one can get into with us.
No, but it is the same thing as doing it across the wire. So it's a hash that gets sent, and
Yeah.
the hash is different every time, actually, from what I remember.
Okay, you know how you...
Playing with
Base OS is,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're using
No,
Windows, they just found a bug in the Windows randomizer.
Oh, right, I heard about that.
Windows OS specifically?
Yep, Windows OS, the randomizer is reversible. So,
Not very random, is it?
Just came across that article as you mentioned it.
We had a random function that generated our session IDs at Grazer, and we found out it wasn't random. People were logging in and getting other people's files. So I changed it to MD5 hash and did all kinds of little trickeries to make it really hideously different.
It sounds like having a user group meeting on federated tables might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you wait a month or two, I might have more experience with it, have something to actually
Sure.
show you.
And I'll have
Sure.
some time with Brian to say what we're going to do to it.
I mean, Giuseppe really got me worried. He pretty much kind of implied it wasn't production quality ready, but I think he was worried more that if you were using updating, this is all read-only. I mean, we're not doing anything. We're not worried about transactions and stuff, but this is all totally for reporting and read-only, so unless...
You could ask me.
He's also used to people thinking it's going to solve all their problems and make it synchronous tables and everything. So he's probably kind of cautioning against, because even Oracle federated tables won't do that. You always have the network lag.
He seemed really pleased when I actually had read his article, because I wrote him an email trying to get, he talked in one of his articles about another article he was going to write, and I couldn't find the other article, and he said he never wrote it because he didn't get enough interest in the first article. He sounded really depressed about it.
Which article was it? Was it the one where he showed how to use it as kind of a way of switching over replication?
Well, there was a hack in the bottom of one of the things where he talked about how you could use federated tables to actually cause you to execute a command on the client. It's kind of a hack, sort of like embedded in a, sort of like almost like a function call.
Oh, wow! I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I need to look at his
I
article.
could figure out how to do it. I mean, I saw
His articles are great.
but he didn't give the details, and I was hoping there was,
I'm going to give a talk at I've submitted a talk at the users conference for Federated, and one of the use cases I was going to do was some of Giuseppe's use cases, because they're great ideas.
Yeah, I thought that was a one about how to use it to basically cause an SQL statement to be actually executed over the client.
Wow.
But can I ask one really simple and probably stupid question before we all have to take off? I'm relatively new to MySQL. I've been doing databases forever, but this is new to me. So I have a problem right now where a lot of tables have values defined as floats. And we're finding out, of course, with the problem with the approximation of the floats that we're having some problems with that. So I want to change them to, in most cases, decimals. And I read online that the best way to do that is to do a MySQL dump, not using the format, and then change it and then re-import it back in. But the senior database administrator that I work with wants me to do it by doing a create table as, create table like, and then doing a select star from and pulling it back. And I'm wondering if there's any conversion problems or I might run into, or would they behave identically if I did that?
It depends on what the client stuff is set to. I've actually found more errors dumping to the Linux file system. That's usually with like character set stuff.
Oh, with UTF?
Yeah, with things like UTF, if you dump it to the file system as opposed to just using the client. I mean, it depends. MySQL dump does a select star from your table and probably will end up locking up your table, but so does select into. But you can do things like, with MySQL dump or with a select star, into, you can, limit it and, say do the first 1,000 and then the next 1,000, whatever.
Do two tables and use one method for one table and then import the data into another table with
Can you not just alter the table?
If you just alter the table, I tried that on a test table and it wiped out all the data.
Oh, super.
Alter the table, alter the column, wiped out the data?
Yeah.
Wow,
Well,
that's
it
not
changed it all
good.
to zeros.
It changed all the floats to zero?
Yeah.
We had that happen to our time formats. Some of
So
our
you know what
time.
I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So that's totally not safe. So then the two choices left. Well,
We
that's
wrote
why
a
I
Perl
always did on a
script to
test.
figure it out
Yeah, no,
because
of course.
I'm not a pro.
do you know feeds very well?
Java
Feeds are the pits. Feeds vary so much across the net, and nobody adheres to any one standard. So the time formats and feeds are the pits.
Yeah.
And so we stored them as varchars, but we realized we needed to sort on time. So we wrote this horrible Perl code. Well, it's not horrible, but it took a lot of work to figure out how to get it to convert it to MySQL timestamp so that we can sort on time.
We save
Because-
a lot of stuff as Unix timestamps.
Yeah, we
Yes, and use
So-
64-bit.
But then when they query out of it, then they have to know the syntax to do that. And we have a lot of reporting, so people complain about that.
But there's
So you can write
there's
functions.
aren't there MySQL
There's
functions
functions.
like to Unix time and
Yes, there are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, the typical
That's what a
end
view is
user
for,
of the
though.
reports.
That's what the view is for.
Oh, we're not that
And we used
sophisticated.
that too, but it didn't catch all of the feed formats necessarily. So we had to
Did you
do the
try
corner
and alter
cases.
two rounds of alter to character first and then alter from character to decimal?
No, that never would have
Yeah, I was
occurred to me,
actually
but
just
that's a
thinking
good
that because you
point.
said that to character.
Because I would think that putting it to a character would be worse, but then I realized, no,
No.
they're actually decimals
Well,
used to
that's
start as
effectively what you're
characters,
doing with it
right?
when
So,
you're
yeah.
dumping it out in
But no, I just thought I could change it from a float to a decimal, and instead I got zeros
Try
across the board. and I
flip
was
the character
okay.
and then another alter character to decimal and see if that'll work.
Right.
Okay.
The other question is, that seems like a really interesting argument to have with someone about like dumping it out versus like making a new table. Is there like one reason that one was strongly preferred, or was it just like
A
do it
hunch.
this way? I thought about doing it like, because in my mind it's like 6 of one, half dozen of the other kind of thing.
Right,
So I
and
just
I
wondering
being
why.
like you would probably test it in several different ways, but I work with someone who's very impatient and is like, I did it that way once and it didn't work, so do it this way, and then I tend to
Oh.
get flustered and.
So just do it
You
both
don't have a
ways.
lot of freedom to
Do
say,
it both
oh,
ways.
it
You
worked
can
this
dump
way.
and make a new table.
No, if I want to test it out and stuff, I can do it.
Just copy into a new table and then rename the new table to the old table
That's
name,
what she
and
was-
then just drop you.
That's what her coworker was saying. But I mean, you know, arguments anyway. You could say, well, if I do it this way, then at least I have a backup.
Right, well, I mean,
if
I just
something
read
goes wrong.
one way on the MySQL site that said, what you should do is this, and then I have the person I'm working for saying, what you should do is that, and
Right.
so I'm trying to...
It is
not-
The
better
other
not
thing
to
is if you-
use database for anything but storing the data, really.
Right.
Numerical things, time, it's horrible. It's always, you get a problem, they're not clean, you know,
Right.
especially with the timing. It's better to use language. For example, we're using Java for that type of things. And you can get your specific library, which is strong at specific things.
Specific data.
Yeah, it is much more reliable. We're crazy about timing. And 64-bit integer, MySQL works well. Don't do dual calculations in Java, and just store.
Right, but with float storage, it stores in an approximation, and that's the problem.
Right.
And we were using this for financial calculations.
You can use in Java. You can use in Java. That's
Reminds me of Office
Right,
space.
but you're saying
But what
that that's
you
their problem
store
now is
may
they were
round.
floats and then
So the actual
They need to
writing
use
into the
decimals.
table
That's
can
what
write
they wanna
the
change
correct
the table.
value, but you read it back out, it's wrong. It doesn't store properly, that's the problem.
because of the approximation. And it's not a MySQL thing, it's an underlying file system.
It's an
thing.
IEEE thing.
Yeah.
With the float data
It's
type.
float. Yeah.
So, the other thing is
7
that,
digits.
yeah, I mean, you can try it both ways and see which way is better. I mean, I would say if you do it with MySQL dump, then you have a backup.
Right.
You could also do something where you can do like just take out that one column and like your primary key and put that into a table. And then, you know, I don't know what else other data, if you have like big like blobs in there or something, you might want to do it that way, where you just take like the primary key in that column and then alter the table, change it to, and it float to decimal, it's all zeros, and then update it, set it back. There's a
right.
lot of different ways you can do it. They're all kind of the same. I mean, I might do it the
MySQL gave me
MySQL
more
dump
money
way,
in
just
my
have a
bank
backup.
account.
Yeah.
Are you switching from some other vendor to MySQL?
No, for some reason, they just decided to implement all of these integers that have to do with financial calculations and weights with floats.